Goodbyes, letting go, change, and finding closure are all necessary transitions in the story of life. It is for certain that nothing that exists will remain as it is now. It is this one truth that is the source of a great deal of pain in our human experience. It is said that our attachments and the longing for a perpetual existence lead to sorrow and brokenness. But the truth is, nothing is constant but change alone. And as inevitable as change is, we often find ourselves to be resistant to it. In Buddhism, it is the concept of impermanence that one is encouraged to embrace with the art and the practice of letting go of attachments and outcomes. The art brings us closer to enlightenment. And every goodbye is a form of letting go, albeit for a moment, a week, a year, or a lifetime. We must all let go of what was and what will never be again. Eventually, we all will have to say our goodbyes to our own life here on earth and to what we've come to identify as ourselves. Indeed, even in life, we must say our goodbyes and farewells to relationships and to the times we shared with others. We will change careers and we will move to new homes. Our children will leave the nest. Our mothers and fathers will grow old and pass away. For every beginning, there is an end. But every ending is a start of something new. Old things must pass away so that new chapters and new paths can begin. Such is life. But too often, goodbyes are bitter, if not tasteless. They usually fall in what I describe as categories of good, bad, and the downright ugly. And I am sure that we've all heard of a few doozies. It has become more frequent that people are learning of the end of a relationship via text message. It's over. Send. What about the young girl who quit her job using a video that she posts online? But before making her grand exit, she disparages the company and her boss. She twerks in the hallway and dances on the top of her desk. The headline reads, "This may be the coolest way ever to quit your job." As a former employer myself, I would say, I think not. She crossed several quitting and hiring taboos, and her letting go process will forever be a spectacle for all to see. I say good luck finding that next job, because girlfriend, they can Google you now. Okay, and then there's the Rhett, if you go, where shall I go? What shall I do? And then Rhett says to Scarlett, frankly, my dear, I don't. Some of you said that like you wanted to say that for a long time. Huh? You want another chance? My sister had an interesting way of processing closure of a failed marriage. She struggled deeply while attempting to navigate relationships after the loss of her marriage, the loss of the ministry which she helped to build, and then the loss of friends who chose sides and remained close to her unfaithful ex. Her voicemail message during this time summed it all up. Hello, this is Allison. I'm unable to take your call right at the moment, but if you leave a message at the beep, I'll get back with you as soon as I can. Oh, by the way, you should know, recently I've been going through some changes. So if I don't call you back, just know this, you are one of those changes. you would have to know how really sweet my sister is to realize how broken her heart must have been to truly record such a message. By the way, I did get her permission to use her story in my sermon. She said, y'all use it if you need to. Since letting go, goodbyes and change is inevitable, it is incumbent upon us to not only to learn how to let go, but to learn how to do it well. Whether it is the death, divorce, job change, or an empty nest, we ought to learn to bid our farewells and say our goodbyes with dignity and grace. Because a good letting go process can bring the needed affirmation and completion to all parties concerned. And a bad or ugly one can leave unnecessary pain and could last a lifetime for all those involved. Often when our transitions aren't done well, people are left with questions. When someone leaves without completing or finalizing the relationship, there's a huge gap. More often than not, those who leave without a proper completion may not feel the pain of parting, but it is usually the ones who are left behind who suffer. They are left with words unsaid, love unexpressed, and a mind that is far from being at rest. Their story is like reading a good book only to discover that the last and final pages are missing. So I feel that it is important that I talk a little bit about resentment and the inability to transition or let go. There are people who have gone unchanged in their hearts because of something that may have taken place many years ago. And I know that there are some things that are so painful that one may never physically or mentally recover. I get that. I do. So please take what I'm about to say in context of what is possible in your own life and applying your own understanding. Here it is. Holding on too tightly to the past will not allow you fully to embrace the future change that must take place in our existence. And I'll say it again. Holding on too tightly to the past will not allow you to fully embrace the future change that must take place in our existence. There are people still holding on to something that took place 65 years ago. I know this because I counseled with them. It happened when you were 5 and you still don't. So it is not necessarily true that time heals all wounds. A few months ago, I was speaking to a long-term friend of mine who finally divulged to me that for the last 25 years, he had held a deep resentment against me for something I had said. By not telling me, he never gave me the opportunity to make right the perceived wrong, but he had this one memory that he chose to freeze in time. I told him that I was truly sorry and that I didn't recall the incident, but more importantly, I no longer am the person I was 25 years ago. It's hard to me to imagine that any person is the same person at 50 as they were at 25. I had changed. And if I were the person that I am now back then, I'm sure I would have made different choices. I've had the honor to be able to officiate many funerals and memorials. And I've seen the very best and some of the sweetest goodbyes, those filled with laughter and tears of joy. But I recently officiated a memorial for a man who hadn't spoken to his son for nearly 30 years. He had a story, and the narrative did not change over time, even though both individuals had. The result was that there was no new memories and no relationship with the grandchildren and the children with their grandfather. The son sat there, right there where Nikki is. He sat right there with this heavy, unresolved look on his face. I will always remember that look. This was a regretful and bitter goodbye. In this case, it was the father who died, still angry with his son over some past event, some past hurt, holding on to that one mistake that wouldn't allow him to ever see the personal growth of his own son. His son was no longer the person that had hurt him. He had changed, as time requires us all to do. I felt a bit personal. This felt a bit personal to me because I also had a troubled relationship with my father. I blamed him for all the pain and suffering that our family underwent as a direct result of his choices. What he did to the family a long time ago continued to have its effect because I simply could not let go. And most of us are guilty of this in one way or another. I realize that holding on to what my father did 30 years ago does not affect him at all, but it is affecting how I am showing up in the world. And he died without ever saying the words that I so desperately needed him to say. I'm sorry. I needed that completion. I felt he owed me that much. But I discovered that it wasn't him, but it was me, that I held the power to bring completion to my own life. And my breakthrough came when I attended an ontological seminar called Landmark Education Forum in Minneapolis a few years ago. All right, you got a Landmark graduate back there. Hey! There, the moderator encouraged the group to seek closures and completions by letting go of any unresolved issues. I would have to forgive my father. And I had heard all of my life that I should forgive him. And I tried, but I really didn't know how. How does one forgive? How does it really work? C.S. Lewis made this telling remark: everyone says forgiveness is a lovely idea until they have something to forgive. So I sat there counting all the reasons why I could not release my father. Besides all that, by that time he had already died. And when I finished that thought, the moderator said, if your father is no longer alive, write him a letter. Well, I'd heard that too before. And every time I wanted to do that, I would just begin to tell him off. I saw no restorative purpose in doing this, but the moderator began to give the guidelines on how I could get this done. And I will tell you what he said was simple but transformative. He said, let your letter be about your own authenticity in carrying the past all these years. And the change happened almost instantaneously as the facilitator began to say that your father can't be someone he isn't. He went on and on, making sure that every one of the attendees comprehended what he was trying to get across. Your father was the person he was because he was the person he was. He could never be someone he's not. I was angry with my father because he was not like Mr. Johnson across the street who brought candy and toys for his kids. So all the other people, good fathers, model citizens with whom I would compare him or whom I would imagine him being, he could never, ever be. All the choices I thought he should have or could have made, he could have only made the choices that he made. End of story. This is called living in the present. As long as you feel, think, or believe that he could have done anything differently than what he actually did, it would only keep you living in the past. And real change is not possible for you. Holding him to what you imagine him to be is not the reality of who he actually is. He could only do what he did. He could only choose what he chose. In the context of his life's circumstances that started even before he was born. This is not to remove any responsibility for his actions, because he paid for them dearly. And this is not to say that we should not strive to be the best people that we can be. But what occurred in the past is forever sealed in time. And all we can do right now is to let go and instead look into the future. That was the reality that I had to accept, for that is the only reality that there will ever be. I asked myself, can it be this simple? I began to free my father and thus free myself. At that point, I no longer assigned blame to my father. I know this sounds a bit simplistic, but it changed my life forever. The letter I wrote to my father enabled me to finally let go. It sounded as if an 11-year-old child wrote it. Because in truth, that was the person who was wounded so many years ago. That's how long I carried my anger. That's how long I lived incomplete. I wrote, "Dear Dad, please forgive me for trying to make you into someone you are not. And forgive me for my anger toward you for your not being that someone whom I thought you should be. I no longer expect you to be the person you are, because it is impossible for you to be anyone else. Dad, I am so thankful that you and you alone are my father. I have been blessed to have a father like you simply because I now have a life that works. I've had great successes. I've experienced great joy and yes, some trouble and tears along the way, but that's life. Dad, I have lived a life of which you would be proud of. I love my daughter and my partner. In fact, I love all of my family. And I know that I've never told you this before, but I love you. So goodbye, Daddy. May you rest in peace, knowing that you are loved and accepted just the way you are. Your son, Randy." I chose to show grace to my father, and for the first time in my life, I was able to let go because I realized that I could never change the past. I can only change my perceptions of it. I began to appreciate the road that led me here and the pivotal part that my father lent to my own story. This is a lot easier when you realize our stories can never be the whole truth. Then the past can no longer hold us captive. We must allow the narratives to shift and to be changed in ways that serve us. It's a shift or a state of change from being a character in a story to being the space in which the stories occur, to being the author, as it were. So I say, let it go. I know that this may be difficult for some, but completing things frees us up. It doesn't automatically imply that everything is going to be wonderful in the future, but it does mean that we can address whatever there is to address in our present day relationships, instead of dramatizing whatever might have been incomplete from the past. Even if the person who wounded us so deeply and left us unresolved and incomplete is still alive, we must sometimes choose to simply accept the apology that was never given. If you need further closure, write them a letter and complete that chapter of your life, allowing the rest of your story to evolve as you so choose. We need to live in such a way that people who will mourn us after we're gone find more gratitude in the fact that we have lived than grief at the advent of our death. Somebody in the earlier service should also say that we should live such a life that when we're gone, it'll make Westboro Baptist Church want to pick at our funeral. That would be a nice little caveat there. Trey Parker said, saying goodbye doesn't mean anything. It's the time we spent together that matters, not how we left it. Let us make our life count so that people will want to remember us and not forget. Samuel Butler said, to die completely, a person must not only forget, but be forgotten. He who is not forgotten is not dead. So each of us has this very important role of ensuring that friends and loved ones are left with memories that bring them joy, memories that make it easier to live and love and enjoy the life that has been touched by our presence. Because if there's one thing that I have taken away from all the weddings and memorials that I've officiated, and I believe that it is that one thing that should be the very primary purpose of life, it is this: we complete our lives by causing good and lasting memories in the minds and hearts of those we love and leave. I don't think there's anything else to be said. We complete our lives by causing good and lasting memories in the minds and hearts of those we love and leave. And since there will always be callous people, hurtful words, and disappointing moments, I feel the need to even go further and say that we should try to create good, affirming memories, even in the hearts and minds of those who do not love us back. I think this is what Jesus meant when he said to do good to those who mistreat us. When he said to treat others as you would have them treat you, or don't repay evil with evil, only with good. I don't believe that there is anything more important than leaving such a legacy of good memories. When this happens, the conditions and circumstances of our relationships begin to reorder and realign themselves. How we see and hear others and how they see and hear us is transformed. And the goodbyes, the letting go, the change and transformation, although often sad, will carry with them gratitude, thoughtfulness, and appreciation. So goodbyes ought to be bittersweet. We live in the realm where everything eventually comes to an end, and yet everything is eternal. Because we cannot reverse the flow of time. Whatever takes place is forever imprinted in the time in which it occurs. Every action and choice has not only the potential to change the future, it does in fact change the future. Every act of kindness or cruelty can inexplicably affect someone's life and therefore the entire course of history forever. Author and spiritual activist Marianne Williamson reminds us that we are powerful beyond measure. And while we are alive, we should not shy away from this awesome responsibility and honor of simply being. We are to take in all the life that we can with courage, with everything it brings, and to live out our values. We are to nudge the course of the future in the direction of our vision. We are to live as fully as we can, even though it means that at any given point there may be a time to let go. However painful, we have to embrace the goodbyes. And while we may mourn the ending of what was, we are to celebrate the fact that we were present. That we had a chance not only to witness the events as they were unfolding, to share the love with others, to stand up for what was right, but also to participate in the outcomes. Goodbyes should be bittersweet because they are closures of the chapters that comprise the books of our lives, because they testify that we indeed lived. So I implore you to seek the good in letting go. Speaking of great memories, I must tell you a story about someone who did a goodbye really well. It is of the remarkable life and transition of our beloved mother and church member, Millie Arthrell. Millie died in 2010 at the age of 97 years of age. And I still remember how very sharp she was. Millie was fully aware that the final chapter of her life was coming to an end. She faced her death with such courage, dignity, and grace like I have never seen anyone do. I visited her a couple of months before her death, and she mostly talked about the books she read. Knowing that she was in decline, she told me how she just longed to complete one more book. She wanted to read one more great tale before she left this earth. So even at this stage, it was about learning, knowing, and discovering more. According to Marlon Lavenhar in his eulogy that he delivered for Millie, she somehow knew the very day that she would make her transition. She wanted desperately to be able to say goodbye to her namesake granddaughter, whose arrival was delayed. And after learning of the delay, she remarked, "Oh, I won't be here." But while there was still time, she requested that all the healthcare workers at Clare House, those who had cared for her, to come to her room. It was a shift change, so all of them were there from both the morning and evening shifts. They gathered around her bed, and Millie perked up and was suddenly alert and coherent. She talked about the wonderful life that she had prior and since moving to Tulsa. She talked about her groups and her clubs, like the Shakespeare group, and her teaching, her church, and the many, many friends she had met along the way. Then she thanked each one of those who had cared and carried her in those final days. She said, "I have found so many wonderful people and rich friendships. And I never knew I could come here to Clare House and also experience such love. You all have made such a difference. Thank you, she said. They tell me that there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Each of the caregivers took turns squeezing her hand and saying their goodbyes. And within less than 20 minutes of her speech, Millie took her last breath and transitioned. And I hope all of our transitions are as graceful. Millie died as she had lived, in completion. She transitioned this life with the same grace and dignity that she had displayed while she was with us. She faced death with courage and resolve. She completed her course. She finished her race. She perfected the goodbye. And I'm so glad that I have the memory of Millie Arthrell as I leave this place. She gives me hope. Her legacy will forever be a part of my story. So this is my last sermon as a staff member of this great church and community. As I leave, I'm reminded of a passage in John's gospel where Jesus is going away and he assures those in his care of his return. He states, "In my Father's house there are many mansions, and I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also." Like Jesus, I too am going away. Like Jesus, I too am coming back again. But since I am not Jesus, I will not be preparing a place for you. But if you find yourself in the Wilmington, Delaware area, I could point you to some great hotels. No, I'm just kidding. My home is always open, as is my heart. But you might be sleeping on the floor, but if you come, but I'm just messing with you. But truly the message I take from this passage is that Jesus assures his followers that they will always be together. I take this to mean that wherever I am, you will be with me. Because I am taking a part of you with me, and I am leaving a part of me here to perhaps encourage you every time you think of my words, my ministry, and our interactions. I go encouraged by the grace that each of you have shown me during the last 5 years. How graceful and forgiving you were when I made mistakes. I will remember how you accepted me just as I am. We have cried, laughed, cursed, fought, but we have done this together. We have done the difficult work on race, women's rights, criminal justice, immigration. And we have done this not always in agreement, but we have stayed together. So as I leave you physically to travel many miles away, I will carry with me this same fight for justice and equality. I will continue to stand against prejudice and bigotry. And I will continue to live out the covenant of this community, which has sustained me, which has sustained all of us since we have been together. I ask, if I have wounded anyone, please forgive me. Charge it to my head and not my heart. I hope your memories of me and of my work here inspire feelings of admiration and love. And remember, as long as we are awakened to our memories, it lasts for as long as we are alive. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Amen.